this is what we're going to talk about. I'm going to take 1 or 2 questions between each topic. That way we can keep things moving along, and I hope to have lots of time at the end to talk about anything that you folks would like to. So hold your questions until I ask for them on that. But I have a couple of questions for you before we go further. How many people have at least a quarter of your roof is sunny? Okay, how many people have solar in that sunny roof? That's what I would expect from this crowd. It's about 2/3, but there's still a third. I think Sunrun and a few of the other installers have some work yet to do to get the rest of you going on this. If you're looking for something to do at this time of crisis on the national front, there's several things that you can do on your own that don't require anybody's permission, or maybe it requires Excel's permission, and installing solar is one of those. Second question is, how many people have test-driven an electric vehicle, a vehicle that plugs in? How many people own one? Okay, we own one, we love it, and I highly recommend them, at least test drive them. What I ask people to do is, even if you're buying a car now and it's not a plug-in, tell the people that you're buying it from, the dealers, that your next car, you want it to plug in. And we also have somebody here that represents the manufacturers of plug-ins, of the chargers themselves with that. And then I want you to answer this question. You're kind of a rarefied audience. You already are here about Colorado Renewable Energy Society. But I want you to answer as if you think the way the state would answer, the average person in the state. How many people would pay, say, 2 cents a kilowatt hour more for electricity to be 100% renewables? And when we say 100%, we don't mean 100%. We mean, 90 or 95. How many people think the average person in Colorado would spend 2 cents more a kilowatt hour? Okay. Just give me a chance. Don't say anything. Give me a chance.
I was just joking, whatever.
Okay. So the next question, how many people, answering as if you're average Coloradan, would pay the same as you pay for electricity right now for renewables? We'd be more people. And how many people would be willing to pay less than they pay right now for renewables? Yeah, let's give a round of applause for the manufacturers and the installers, because that's actually where we are right now. It's all about the money. Okay, it is. Things have changed. Now, I'm sure you're like me and you wait with bated breath for August of each year to come around, because the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory puts out 2 studies, one on utility scale wind and one on utility scale solar, in August of each year. I like this because it's the best picture that I think we have of where the cost really is. This is based on power purchase agreements. They're just contracts for solar and wind around the United States. And these are contracts that are actual contracts. They're actually deals that have been signed. And what we're seeing is in 2015, the average price for one of these deals was 2 cents a kilowatt hour for wind and 4 cents for solar. Yeah, that's pretty phenomenally low. There's more to this story. They're 20-year fixed price contracts. That means in year 1, they're 2 cents, and in year 20, they're 2 cents. There is no adder for inflation. That means that the real price declines over time. This is really very exciting of what's happened with this. Now, what happens when government-regulated monopolies, I'm not going to ask this question, but I'm learning how to speak Republican. Seriously. You don't say monopoly, you say government-regulated monopoly. And if you're really into the fold, you say evil government-regulated monopoly. Okay, government-regulated monopolies own wind and solar. Customers lose. We know from this study that in 2014, the average contract price was 2.4 cents. In 2015, it was 2 cents. And if we project to 2016 using just that decrease, we'd see 1.7 cents a kilowatt hour. In fact, there's some early indication that that price may be real. That it may actually even be a little lower than 1.7 cents a kilowatt hour. That's incredible. Xcel Energy got approval for Rush Creek, a 600 megawatt, that's very large, wind farm in Colorado at 2.9 cents a kilowatt hour. I'm not sure quite why we're paying 2.9 cents so Xcel can put their name on it, when if we'd gone to the open market, we probably could have gotten 2 or maybe even significantly less than that. That's going to cost us about $500 million over the course of the next 20 years for Xcel to have its name on it and to get its 2.9 cents a kilowatt hour. It's an interesting world out there. So why? Why are these prices down so low? And it's because mass production works. There are really no exceptions to mass production working. One large coal-fired power plant or nuclear power plant over the course of the year makes the same amount of electricity as 300 wind turbines in Colorado, makes the same amount of electricity as 13 million solar panels. Okay, this is like copying the Bible by hand. This is like the Gutenberg printing press, and this is like a high-speed digital press. Mass production works. What's more, for electric vehicles, we're making factories that will make billions with a B of batteries. Billions and billions of batteries. The price is crashing on the price of batteries. And I'll actually have an example of that a little bit later. Okay, I don't like this chart either. There's just way too much information on it, but I got it from somebody else, and I like it because it really tells the story about what's happened with the money. These columns, they represent all of Xcel Energy's Colorado plants, okay? There's hydro over there, there's a lot of coal, there's some combined cycle gas turbine, that's one kind of gas, natural gas turbine. And then there's gas turbines, just combustion turbines over here, and that's another kind. The light blue-gray, that's operations, maintenance, and fuel cost. The actual cost of producing 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. The black, that's the capital cost, assuming that you make an awful lot of renewable electricity from each of these plants, okay? So the total cost, that's the height of the bar, but the light blue, that's the operational cost, the fuel and the operations and maintenance. The black line here, that's Rush Creek's price, roughly. You'll notice that it's below the blue line, the blue bar, on most of these. And this is actually high. You'd actually have to go down here to get to where we expect wind to be in 2016, contract signed in 2016, if things follow through. You never know for sure until you get there on that. Down here, that's below the operational cost of all of Xcel's power plants in Colorado, every one of them. To put that in perspective, that would mean to make electricity as cheaply as a new wind farm, you'd have to be able to build a coal or natural gas generator for free. And even then, the electricity that it made would be more expensive than wind and solar. Pretty excellent in my book. Now, I'm like a lot of people. I'm hearing more and more people saying this. You never know till it's true, but a tipping point. That's when change happens very quickly. A tipping point, I think, occurred for renewable energy in 2016. Oh, we won't know for another 5 or 6 years, but I think so. Here's some of the evidence. Renewables are now the cheapest form of electricity. The developing world installed more renewables than the developed world. That was actually in 2015, but it was 2016 as well. Well, why? Does anybody have an idea why the developing world would be installing more renewables than the developed world? The people that don't have the money are installing more renewables. It's because it's cheaper, right? It's the lowest cost. And if you don't have electricity and you want electricity, then you're going to go with the lowest cost, right? But if you do have electricity like us, you don't have the push. You don't need to go out and go buy electricity. Our lights are on for, largely from coal, 75% or so, coal and natural gas. We have the electricity that we need, okay? We're not going out there and shopping for new stuff because we don't have to. We might want to, but we don't have to. And if in the developed world, that might not be true. In the United States, there are more clean energy jobs than either coal or oil extraction jobs. Now, it's not both together. It's either coal extraction jobs or oil extraction jobs. There are more clean energy jobs. That's brand new. That didn't happen before. This is phenomenal change, and we'll be talking about more tipping points as we go. I'll take one question, quick question preferably, or none. I'm happy to go on. You like this? This is good? So his question is, I'll repeat the question, why are we paying more to Xcel? And the answer is because Xcel is really good at innovating at the Public Utilities Commission. So they convinced the Public Utilities Commission that we should be paying 2.9 cents, so we're paying 2.9 cents. The docket goes on for several hundred pages at least, by maybe even 1,000 pages on this. And I don't want to get into the details on this because we'll talk all night about what's wrong with the PUC and that kind of thing. I don't really want to get into the detail on this, but if the Public Utilities Commission says, yes, Xcel can do this, then yes, Xcel can do this. That's the short answer. There's a longer answer that's involved in that.
Don't forget how you're teaching yourself to speak, Ken. You said Public Utilities Commission. Didn't you mean evil government regulators?
Thank you. Evil government regulators. Let's talk about Renewables 101 and Grid 101. Okay, my daughter bakes really great cakes. And like most bakers, she follows a recipe. The recipe for 100% renewable energy is 100% renewable electricity and electrifying transportation and electrifying heating. Now I'm going to talk some about electrifying transportation. I'm not planning to talk about this, but if somebody at the end wants me to talk about electrifying heating, I'd be happy to do that. Okay, you really should be proud of the city of Boulder. They're working very hard to look at how we can rapidly move forward. And this is one of my favorite pieces of data from them. This is a study that the city made happen. We've been asking for years, how much renewable energy, how much solar can we do on rooftops in the city of Boulder? Not just solar, good solar. I don't want the shady stuff, I want the sunny stuff. And they got together with a company called maptowell.com, and they took LiDAR data. That's like radar, but with laser beams. LiDAR is very precise. It can tell you the angle and the elevation, and LiDAR sees the trees, so it can tell you shading as well. And you add all that up, and the brighter the spot is, the better the solar is. I'm going to point over here. This is zooming down, so there's a single house. You can't quite see it from back there. But here's a tree right here. You can see the shading, and here's the sunny area. I was presenting this to somebody the other day, and he said, you know, that's my house. The total amount is 550 megawatts of good solar rooftop in the city of Boulder. That's 55% of our annual usage of electricity, roughly, with today's technology. That's probably as much solar as we would want. And you kind of wonder why you might want to install utility-scale solar if you've got so much good solar rooftops. And that would be a very good question to ask. I want to get a little conceptual here. Picture the road to your front door. We don't let FedEx own that road. And the reason is because it would limit our freedom. They'd say who could visit us. They'd say who we could buy from. You got to buy from shippers that use FedEx. One way to fix this with roads would be competition, right? So we could put in two roads, one owned by UPS and one owned by FedEx. Does anybody think that's a good idea to put in two roads? No, it's crazy. Roads are a natural monopoly. It doesn't make sense to have competition for them. Keep that word in mind, natural monopoly. Now, here's Grid 101. This is everything, well, almost everything you need to know. Well, most of what you need to know about the grid. Generation, that's all the ways we make electricity. Transmission, that's the big towers with big insulators running at very high voltage that can carry electricity for hundreds or even thousands of miles efficiently. But you wouldn't want to be close to it. That's why it's on the big towers. And then distribution, that's a much lower voltage that gets the electricity from those big transmission towers to our houses relatively safely. And there are substations in between, and in the substations there are transformers. Transformers transform one voltage to another, and other things that are in substations are switches, so you can switch things around if you need to. If a line goes down, you can switch to other lines. and regulators. And all regulators do is help us keep safe and high quality power. That's the electrical grid when everybody talks about it. And the things that you should remember are generation, transmission, and distribution. And those two are wires. They're natural monopolies. It doesn't make sense to have competition between two sets of wires, just like it doesn't make sense to have two sets of roads. Now, Excel owns all three. Does that make Excel an unnatural monopoly? Well, actually, they're called an investor-owned utility, but they're also monopoly. Because and one more piece of things from Excel is the price. How much do we pay for electricity overall? It turns out that the wires, the natural monopoly, that costs us about 1/3 of our electric bill, of our total bill. And generation, that's about 2/3. And this data is from Excel. This is actually from a bill stuffer. You've all gotten this in your Excel bill at some time or other. Now, a lot of us want to see competition for generation, and we want to see transmission that's run regionally. These colored areas on the map, those are called several different things, unfortunately. Transmission system operator, regional transmission organization, or independent system operator. I'm mostly going to call them transmission system operators, or TSOs. They're a nonprofit or some other kind of government-run or supported organization for the benefit of shareholders. As government organizations go, they aren't particularly evil. In fact, they're hardly evil at all. Most of them are very good at doing what they do. And they tend to run over multiple states, although not all of them do. And then distribution, I think, and a lot of other people think that that should be run locally. That isn't the same thing as owned locally. Distribution system could be run locally and owned by somebody else, just like a transmission line could be owned by another company, even though it's run by a nonprofit. Does that make sense? Okay. That way you can get the benefits of competition for building a particular transmission line, but where the transmission line goes, that's a decision that's done by a nonprofit. And when you put those three things together, things of great beauty can happen. Because when you have those things, you can get to 100% renewables. In fact, we have examples of 100% renewables right now in the United States. We also have them in some countries that have it. Not as an aspirational goal, they are there, okay? Cities like Aspen and Palo Alto and Burlington, Vermont, counties like Marin and Sonoma in California, and Jefferson County in Washington, they're at 100% right now, I believe. And Georgetown, Texas, and I like to use Georgetown, Texas because one of these is not like the other, okay? Those others, they're all progressive. Georgetown, Texas, rock-bed conservative, it's all about the money. They're a muni. That means they own their own distribution system. They run it and own it. They're in ERCOT's territory, a nonprofit transmission system operator, a TSO. And ERCOT, Energy Reliability Council of Texas. Yeah, okay, I got it. Good. It's an energy open market, an energy only market. And that's not quite true. It has a small capacity payment, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. Georgetown owned no generation. And about 5 years ago, they said, gosh, our contracts are coming up in 2015. What are we going to do? Well, we want the cheapest electricity. What do we have right now? Coal baseload power plants. That means they run like this all the time. And natural gas peaking plants. That means they can go up and down. Because electricity doesn't run like this all the time. Electricity goes up and down, right? In the middle of a hot summer day, your electricity is a peak. And gas plants, they're very flexible. They can fill in that peak. Baseload coal plants, very inflexible. They need to run like this all the time. Okay? You want to make sure that everything's filled in under your graph for that. And they said, what's the cheapest? And they said, boy, that wind stuff's really cheap. Like really cheap. And they said, but you know what? The wind doesn't blow full blast all the time through the year. What can we do about that? They said, well, the wind's so cheap, we could actually buy more wind than we need. So that when the wind isn't blowing full blast, we'll have enough electricity. And they said, that's pretty cool. In fact, it might make sense for us to have twice the amount of wind that we need so that when the wind's going halfway, we'll be in good shape. We'll have all the electricity we need. And they said, that's really cool, except look at this year of data that we have and the wind. In fact, they had multiple years of data. And they said, you know, it's really good, except there are big holes in the daytime and in the summer. And they said, well, you know, the sun shines pretty good in the daytime and in the summer. And in fact, in most of the country, not everywhere, but in most of the country, wind blows best at night and in the winter, and solar is best, you know, I don't have to even tell you. And so they said, let's fill in with solar. Because solar is so cheap that we can do that. Because the wind is so cheap, it helps out the solar, which is just a little bit more expensive. You know those contracts we talked about for 2015 at 2 and 4 cents? Guess who got that? Okay. They're at 200% renewable, and they said, this is kind of wasteful. We have a whole city's worth more electricity than we need some of the time. And they said, but wait, we're in ERCOT. We have an energy-only market. We can sell on the open market. So they're selling for thousands of hours a year. And for a few hours a year, when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, they're buying. And because they're selling for thousands of hours a year, they don't care if they're getting a relatively low cost for that electricity. And they pay a relatively high cost for the hundreds of hours a year that they don't have electricity. This is how you can be 100% renewable. And here's the bottom line. They were at 9 cents a kilowatt hour for residential. You pay about 12 to 13 cents. The national average is about 13 cents for residential. They're at 9. They think they can hold that for the next 20 years with no price increases. Does that sound good? That sounds really good to me. Another tipping point. We have examples, particularly examples of all about the money, cities, counties, and countries at 100%.
How do we deal with Goldman Sachs wanting to get their 50%?
Wanting to get their 50% of
Whatever,
you know, the wind contract deals that I showed earlier, that includes profit. That includes Goldman Sachs's piece. That's why I like the projects, because they're real contracts. They're not talking about it. They're not testimony at the PUC. They're not some faked up number. They're actual prices that have been gotten on projects around the country. Let's talk about making high levels of renewables work, because I know it's going to come as a shock to you, but the wind doesn't blow all the time, and the sun doesn't shine all the time. Did I say that right? Yes. Okay. We already have the first 2 ways down, because that's what Georgetown, Texas did. You build more than needed, and wind and solar work well together. The next step is not going to be a surprise. It's electricity storage, and batteries at least are getting really cheap because we're making huge investments in building factories for making batteries for electric vehicles. I'll talk more about storage in a little while. Distributing wind and solar around the NAP. I have my technical presentation here, my displays here for this. You all can see this, right? This is Wyoming and this is Colorado. I have a study that shows it. You see Wyoming and Colorado up there too. When the wind is blowing in Wyoming, there's a real good chance that the wind is not blowing in Colorado. And if the wind is blowing in Colorado, there you go. There's a real good chance that it's not blowing in Wyoming. If we use transmission lines to connect the two of these, we reduce the variability of these wind farms. And if we mix in solar farms, we do even better with that. So that's the next way, is we'll distribute wind and solar around the map. This is my wife. This is our Leaf. We fight over who gets to drive it because it really is lots of fun. And she wins. It's her car. But one of the things that I love about it is when we just plug into the wall at night at our home, regular residential rate, it costs us about the same as if we were filling up our gasoline vehicle at $1 a gallon gasoline. And I like buying gasoline at $1 a gallon, even if it's not gasoline, because it's, largely or increasingly renewable wind and solar. I have solar in my house too for that. So I love that. But you know what you do when you have the excess of something? You lower the price, right? And so I actually think that I should be able to charge my electric vehicle when we have excess wind and solar at 25 cents a gallon. What's more is, if it's 2 cents a kilowatt hour of electricity for the wind, we can pay the basic cost of the transmission and distribution system and still come in at 25 cents a gallon equivalent. That's pretty excellent. Now, my charger has to be smart enough to do this, and the gentleman that sells charger here is smiling because he knows that, in fact, some of his chargers are capable of doing that if the utility is capable of supporting that. Guess who doesn't support that yet?
Excel.
Oh, really? Okay. Now, our leaf, today's leaf, goes 100 miles, serious, realistic range. Okay? We rarely go over 30 in a day. We rarely drive it out of town. But we really probably want to charge it up to 50 so we have enough. So every night, I'm going to tell my charger to fill up to 50, as if we were filling up our gasoline vehicle at $1 a gallon gasoline. And I like buying gasoline at $1 a gallon, even if it's not gasoline, because it's, largely or increasingly renewable wind and solar. I have solar in my house too for that. So I love that. But you know what you do when you have the excess of something? You lower the price, right? And so I actually think that I should be able to charge my electric vehicle when we have excess wind and solar at 25 cents a gallon. What's more is, if it's 2 cents a kilowatt hour of electricity for the wind, we can pay the basic cost of the transmission and distribution system and still come in at 25 cents a gallon equivalent. That's pretty excellent. Now, my charger has to be smart enough to do this, and the gentleman that sells charger here is smiling because he knows that, in fact, some of his chargers are capable of doing that if the utility is capable of supporting that. Guess who doesn't support that yet?
Excel.
Oh, really? Okay. Now, our leaf, today's leaf, goes 100 miles, serious, realistic range. Okay? We rarely go over 30 in a day. We rarely drive it out of town. But we really probably want to charge it up to 50 so we have enough. And when it's cheap, fill it all the way. Right? That makes sense. And chargers can do that now. Y'all know what surge pricing is. Thank you, Uber, right? Some of the time, it's going to cost $5 a gallon to fill up. It's only a few hours a year, so I don't really care. And, my charger, I want to wake up to 50 miles in my tank. Okay. If there isn't 50 miles in my tank, then my charger is going to pay, and I'll have to do the $5. The thing that's nice is the night before, it might have been 25 cents a gallon. And I filled up. I don't even need to do a charge. And of course, next year's Leaf, 200 miles. Chevy's Bolt with a B, 240 miles of realistic range. Tesla has cars that go 300 miles of realistic range. And most people, the vast majority of the time, don't drive over 30. And generally, if you're going to drive over 30, tomorrow I'm going to drive to Denver, I'm going to drive to Fort Collins or to Colorado Springs. And you tell your charger, fill it up, please. Try to get me the cheapest price. But if it's $5 a gallon a couple times a year, I don't care. That's called encouraging electricity use when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, and discouraging it when it's costly, when they aren't blowing, when we're using more expensive sources of electricity. The final two pieces is we have to go through a transition, and maybe for a long time, for that last 5 or 10%, getting to 100%, we'll use fossil generation for that. We should use the existing fossil generation because we have more than enough fossil generation that's out there. Some people are adamant that we should close the coal plants. I like that as an aspirational goal. But from the standpoint of keeping the lights on, if the coal plant can be set so that it can only run a few hours a year, why should we close it and have to build new things when we can use something old? Not all coal plants can do that, but many can. And the final thing, which probably should have been the first thing, is we really ought to use energy efficiently. I say that because people said, you don't talk about efficiency, Ken. And it's because I assume efficiency as far as that goes. Okay, here's our first big barrier. What mix are we going to use? How are we going to decide? How are we going to decide? How should we decide?
What's appropriate?
What's appropriate for your region? That would be a criteria. Do you have something to add? Nope, she was just yawning. Don't yawn in the front row, I'll ask you. Anybody else have a different idea?
The cleanest first.
The cleanest first, that might be one way to say it.
Get the prices right, let the market.
Price is right and let the market set it. That's what I think. So the question is, who do you trust more? A government-regulated monopoly to make these decisions, which requires a fair amount of innovation, or an open market to make these decisions? Let's have a show of hands for government-regulated monopoly. Wait, what? We got two? Excellent, 2 people said government-regulated monopoly. And the rest of you, I assume, open market? Let's have a show of hands. Yes, okay. The fundamental problem is, you know, I'm going to be frank here. Excel and the other government-regulated monopolies have done a really excellent job through the years of keeping our lights on at reasonable cost, okay? That's the truth. And things are changing very rapidly. And when things change very rapidly, you need to look at things differently. And the monopolies are not good at innovation. They aren't. And I'll have some examples of that later. Our next tipping point deal. We actually have a pretty clear picture of keeping the lights on at 100%, or darn close. We didn't have that a couple years ago. Let's talk about open electricity markets. I'll take one question. Yeah. Making sure that the electric system stays on, the lights stay on, and that kind of stuff. You know, I used to worry about that a lot, but you know what? When we look at the places where there are open markets, we actually aren't seeing problems with keeping capacity in place. Some places, some of the open markets, have capacity payments there. They pay money, a small amount usually. Sometimes it adds up to millions of dollars, but it's still a relatively small amount of money to keep capacity in place so that you can cover these different things. In Texas, they let the price go up. They let the free market work. It might go up to $30 a kilowatt hour for a few hours a year. And that incentivizes things. And so far in Texas, it's working brilliantly. Texas's rates are going down over time. And in fact, where we look at where there's open markets around the country, in general, their prices are going down. There's an exception to that, and I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, this chart was my gift from the universe to me about this time last year. This is 2015. This is what the chart showed. Here's 2016 year to date, and don't worry about 2016. If you care, I'll talk about it. And I looked at that and I said, wow, 3 gigawatts of renewables went to non-monopolies, non-government regulated monopolies. That's a lot. In fact, it's about 30% of all wind deals were to corporations. Corporations you may have heard of, like Google and IBM and IKEA and Volkswagen and Mars Candies. 7% of all solar was to corporate deals, power purchase agreements. That's a fantastic change. Back in 2010, there was almost nothing. 2012, almost nothing. That's a phenomenal change in a very short period of time. Well, why? Well, it's because it's low cost and because it's 20-year no price increase. Now, if you're a business, you've never seen a contract for 20 years for something that costs you a lot of money at fixed price, declining real price. You've never seen it. Oh, you can buy like natural gas for a 7-year contract and you pay more for it up front. But fixed price, declining real price, unheard of. Oh yeah, and these corporations have a commitment to renewables also. They want to see lots of renewables. And 90% of these deals are only places with open markets. Open markets, that's the places with the green star. Now there are 2 symbols here. There's the green star, and then there's the transmission tower. Transmission tower means it's a TSO. It's a nonprofit run transmission system, not run by monopoly utility. And green means it's an open market. You'll notice there are a couple of greens without transmission, but the vast majority of them are, and the vast majority of the functional open markets also have TSOs. They also have the transmission. There are 21 states with some kind of open market. This isn't something that's rocket science new, representing more than half of the US population, some kind of open market. The types of open markets. My community chooses. My community chooses what my generation source is. A corporation can choose, or an individual can choose. Most of the successful open markets have at least 2 of those and a TSO. At least 2 of community, corporate, or individual. I'll give some real specific examples here in just a second. Let's use Illinois as an example. Now, they have all 3 of these as yes, and they have a TSO. So their transmission is run by a nonprofit. Extremely successful. More than 300 communities have chosen their own supplier for electricity. And I'm going to skip over a little bit of this, but one of the reasons it's so successful is that in Illinois, the companies that own the wires don't own any generation at all. Let's look at Texas. Texas has does not have community choice. There are some munis that have been there for a long time, but there is no community choice. They do have corporate choice and individual choice. An individual can get online and sign up with 50 different companies and different rate plans. Unbelievable choice out there. You want lots of renewables? You can have it. You want a rate plan that looks like this? You can have it. They have TSO from ERCOT and the real-time open market I've been talking about. Let's talk about California for just a second. California has community choice and corporate choice, but doesn't have individual choice. If you're an individual, you have to do either what the monopoly says or what your community says for that. California went to open market and they blew it. Everybody heard of Enron? That was California. That's what happens when one company owns too much of the generation, too much of the generation system. They're able to manipulate the market. So one of the lessons from California, if you want to have an open market, make sure that no single company is in control of that market. You have to have real competition. And then I want to talk about Nevada, because in Nevada, they had a ballot issue to go to open markets in 2016. 70% of the voters in Nevada said, we want an open market. Is that unbelievable? 70%, you never get 70% on a ballot issue. MGM Resorts in Nevada, Nevada state law says that existing law, this is new law, it's going to take, to implement this, what the voters voted for, 5 years, maybe longer. MGM Resorts had an opt-out already existing in Nevada law. It said that if a corporation wants to, they can exit their monopoly power provider and pay a fee. And MGM Resorts has agreed to pay $87 million to exit from Nevada Power. Now here's the rest of the story. How did that number come about, 87 million? Well, state law says the PUC decides. PUCs never decide anything. The PUC went to Nevada Power, and they said, how much should it be? And Nevada Power said, 87 million. They'll never pay that. And MGM Resorts said, sold. If you're a company about to pay 87 million, do you say sold because it was a bad deal? No, you said sold because it's a really good deal. You're going to save a lot of money. And, oh, by the way, get very quickly to 100% renewables. There are a lot of other resorts and casinos that are looking to switch forward on that. But this is my gift for the next 10 years at least. It's not this, it's what comes next from this, but it's from Google. Google in late December announced 100% renewables is just the beginning. This is their press release. I'm thrilled to announce that in 2017, Google will reach 100% renewable energy for our global operations. Google uses a lot of energy. And so I was reading through this, and it said blah, 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 white paper. And so, I mean, you figured out by now I'm kind of a geek on this, so I downloaded the white paper. Here's the white paper, Achieving Our 100% Renewable Energy Purchasing Goal and Going Beyond. They say right now, this year, 2017, that we'll be 100% renewables, but that's not enough. That's over the course of the year. We want to be every hour of the year, we want to be renewable on a regional basis with regional renewables. And there are three strategies that we're going to use to do that. First, we're going to buy regionally. The second is that we'll broaden our energy sources to include storage and other things like that. And third, and this is the gift, we'll work to promote policies that empower energy consumers to choose their energy supply. This is Google saying this, not Ken Regelson. And they're saying it because it will help accelerate the transition to 100% while also driving economic growth. How many people know that Google and Apple have applied to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to be able to sell electricity in the markets where electricity sales could be? Goodly number of you know that. The rest of you know it now. Yeah, okay, well, Google thinks they can make money. You know, in fact, Google is really very good at dealing with large volumes of information, like how you might balance out lots of different renewable systems working all over the place, right? That's what Google's fabulous at. Google's out there swinging for the fences on this. This is my gift, I don't know, 10-year gift. But wait, there's more. There's a place called buyersprinciples.org. 62 companies, this is actually back several months ago. There are probably more companies than that, representing $5 trillion in market capitalization, have signed on to this. And what it says is, gosh, renewables are cheap, okay? We want it directly. I had to call them up to find out what directly meant. It means either directly contracting on-site or off-site with renewable electricity facilities in competitive markets, or using a special contract vehicle with a government-regulated monopoly. Now, how many people here know what WindSource is? Okay, what it is a program where you can, from Excel and many other utilities have this, where you can pay extra and get wind power. Yay. Right, pay extra. You got it. Okay, it's great. When the program first came out, it was fabulous. Okay. I don't want to talk about it. We've talked about enough things already. We don't need to get into RECs, okay? It costs more, but renewables cost less, right? So why are we paying more? And that's the problem with this, is I think most of these companies are fairly quickly going to find out that their monopoly isn't going to want to do that, and that many more companies, in addition to Google, are going to start publicly saying, we want open markets, please. So this was our first big barrier. And our second big barrier is how are we going to move from a government-regulated monopoly to an open market? Because I think that's what we need. And I'm not alone thinking this. I got people like Google standing behind me or beside me. Tipping point, next step. Corporations buying lots of wind and solar without monopolies. Open markets and TSOs, meaning cheap 100% renewables quickly, and Google 100% in 2017 with plans to go a lot further. Questions?
What I'm trying to work out is the big, heavy industries.
Yes.
Steel plants, can they be supplied regularly by renewables?
So his question is about steel mills, and I can see where Google isn't a steel mill, but I got to tell you that Google uses a massive amount of energy, and it happens at peak times. It does not happen evenly throughout the day. But the answer for a steel mill is, from my standpoint, would be set up your processes so that you can use cheap renewables. You know how much you can invest because you know how much cheaper it is, okay? And in fact, when you're actively smelting steel, you need to use a lot of energy. But if all you're doing is keeping the temperature hot, you don't need quite so much energy. And we're actually seeing areas where people are figuring this out. And increasingly, as companies sign up for their own individual contracts, we'll see more and more of that. So the answer is, yeah, I think so. Can I prove it? No. Do you want to add in quickly?
There's also another way steam, convert that to energy. And that's what a lot of those industries have done. And that saves them the time that allows them to then buy renewables on the market.
Okay, so the answer was there's waste heat from a lot of these industries, and we'll be able to take advantage of that. One more, and then I'm going to move on.
I just on a previous graph on the, when you had the TSOs and the stars and the transmission lines. So Colorado and New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, is that all vertically owned? Is that a vertical industry? That's why
There's no open market and there's no transmission system operator in the states that don't show a mark. However, that doesn't mean that you couldn't have it. So for example, a co-op or a muni could choose to allow corporate choice and at least theoretically choose to allow individual choice.
So just recently, did a few, like Tri-State and Cherry Hills, apply, are they thinking of applying for a TSO in Colorado?
There's talk about using an energy imbalance market, and I haven't heard of anything beyond that, where Excel and Tri-State would work together for energy imbalance, which is part of the puzzle, but not the whole puzzle. And the question is who controls it and for what benefit? And the control and the benefit would be for the monopoly.
It's the Cal
He's
ISO.
correct.
It's the Cal ISO issue.
I think Tri-State's trying to think about the Southwest Power Pool, but,
Yeah, exactly.
you know.
So,
Yeah, where they go.
so many of the ISOs are talking about expanding. Southwest Power Pool, which is kind of this area right here, used to be just this area, and they expanded into a number of additional states. That's another way that TSOs can grow. And if you're talking lots of renewables, the larger the area you spread them out over, the better off you are. California has talked about expanding Cal ISO out into this region over here on that. And I don't want to go any further on this because I know how long we'll spend. Okay, let's talk about storage just really briefly. There are a zillion ways to store energy. And frankly, I think that batteries are going to be used mostly for the time frame of minutes to hours of storage and maybe into days, but probably not weeks. And it just has to do with the way batteries work. If you've got to store enough batteries to store weeks worth of energy, that's an awful lot of batteries. And they're kind of expensive to make, even as they get cheaper and cheaper. But hours and minutes, I actually don't think we're going to see a lot of other things besides batteries fairly soon. I'm happy to be proved wrong. All I really care about is what's the cheapest that solves the problem. But I think it's going to be batteries. But some of these other things, I don't care if it winds up, okay, if it's a spring or a rubber band. I don't care if it's something spinning like a flywheel. I don't care if it's superconductivity, where we use the fundamental principles of physics to store energy. Other ways that we can store energy. We can store it as heat. You all have hot water heaters at home. If you make your hot water heater a little bigger and run it from electricity and have it set up so it's smart and it says when's that electricity cheap and fills up, charges all the way when it's cheap, you might get 2 or 3 days of heat, hot water from that for your house. In fact, we do. That's what we do with our solar system, is we charge it that way. That's energy storage. Works for me. I don't care as long as it's cost effective. You can store it in molten salt and use the molten salt to run turbine. You can store energy in gravity. This is a gravity light, very inexpensive to build. It's meant for the third world. What it is a big strap and a brick, and you lift the brick up, and it gives you a couple hours of light. And when it runs out, you lift the brick again. Okay? You can do that on a utility scale. You have a mine shaft, take a great big heavy something and you let it drop down, and then when you have excess electricity, you crank it back up again. You can use gravity with trains. Picture a steep, maybe cog railway train track with electricity on the side and a bunch of train cars filled with rocks. Pretty cheap, right? And when you have excess electricity, you move it uphill, and when you need electricity, you let it go downhill. In fact, they're building one of those in California to store energy. I love it when people are building stuff and not just talking about it. Pumped hydro. You have a reservoir here, you have a reservoir there, you pump it up when you have excess, and you let it generate electricity going downhill. I think everybody gets that. There are other ways to do that. There are people talking about stacked caverns underground, where the caverns are big enough that you can store a fair amount of water in them. and you pump it up and down, but you don't have to worry about taking up land out on the outside. You don't have to worry about where your water is going to come from. In Australia, they're looking into this. It's a prototype right now. It's a development. I think they got $5 million to look at it. It's going to cost a lot more to do it. 2 giant open pit gold mines that are played out, okay, at different levels, right? They already had water to it because it was a gold mine. They needed water to help extract the gold. They already have electricity to it. The grid is already there. The transmission system's already there. They even have a little village to keep the workers. That's where the workers for the gold mine used to live. That's where the workers that make this into a giant pumped hydro system, if it's cost effective, if it makes sense. I'm going to talk about one more, liquefied air. This is a new one. They're building this in England, I think it is. It's in the Energy Should Be News letter that maybe last month or this month or something, I don't know. You take and liquefy air, you make it liquid, and put it in a big tank. Big tanks, even for really cold liquefied air, are pretty cheap to build. And that's when you have excess electricity. When you need it, you let it vaporize, and that can drive a turbine. And in fact, they think they can do this cost effectively, particularly where there's some place that has excess heat. Because it turns out in that expansion process, if you add heat, it's a lot more efficient. And so they've actually found a very nice, what I consider to be pretty renewable place. There's a landfill that's an old landfill, it's capped, it's generating natural gas, methane. They're using that in a turbine to generate electricity, and that has waste heat that they're going to use the waste heat to gasify the liquefied air. You get it. Much more efficient as far as how that goes. Again, I don't care how they do this, but I think that the days and weeks are going to be covered by something that involves tanks because tanks are so cheap. Maybe it's something like this, electricity and water and a carbon source like maybe sewage or trash or compost into this converter. That's the new technology. And that makes, maybe it's ethanol. And you stick it in a big tank, and you can use that for long-distance transport and building heat if you need to. But most of the time, we're going to put it back into natural gas turbines that can be converted to running ethanol, or can be converted to running diesel, for that matter, and that'll get us electricity. And so, actually, as sort of a think piece, quite a while ago, I said, for all of Boulder's electricity for 2 weeks, how big a tank would we need? Because it's not just enough to say, I got this idea. It's, can you actually build it in the real world? And the answer is, it's about the size of one of the city's 6 water tanks that we already have. If you can build a water tank, I suspect you can also build an ethanol tank that's big enough. Each of these is good for, if it was filled with ethanol, is good for whatever. So maybe it looks something like this or something totally different. I don't care. Solve the problem. You have to solve all these problems cheaply. That's what I care about. Let's give you a brief Muni update. How many people know about Boulder's municipalization effort? Most of you. How many people live in the city of Boulder, voters in the city of Boulder? Okay, those of you that do, those of you that are interested and don't, you're welcome to join us. There's probably going to, there's a reasonable chance that there's going to be a ballot issue at the end of this year with regard to Muni. Not a guarantee, but there's a good possibility of that. And we are activating, we being the advocates for Muni in Boulder, empowerourfuture.org. And if you put Muni next to your name on that thing that was on the email list that was passing out, that's what you're going to get subscribed to, is only for big announcements, not lots of emails, not a discussion list. And we think there's going to need to be activating people on this. You've probably seen quite a bit of press that's negative. I'm not going to get into all the details on this, but let me give a very brief background for some of you that haven't been involved with this. Why Boulder? We're well educated, we're well off, we have a history of innovation. Our fundamental choice back in 2011 when we first voted for this was 5 years of legal battles or 50 years of Excel's bad fossil investments. It turns out it's probably going to be more like 7 years of legal battles, but you know, we didn't know because not very many people, in fact, nobody has done this at our scale in the United States anytime recently. And it's still 50 years of Excel's bad fossil investments because they've extended the life on their coal-fired power plants. In 2011, Boulder voters voted to give city council authorization to municipalize only if rates and reliability could be shown to be competitive and that we could do lots of renewables, okay? And Boulder voters supported that at 52%. Excel spent more than $1 million on a fake grassroots campaign. Against it, we won. Excel came back to voters with another fake grassroots campaign where they put the ballot issue onto the ballot by getting signatures, okay? In this case, yes would have killed municipalization. No means continue municipalization. 2013, 66%. We killed them, literally. That's just a huge percentage as far as how that goes. Said, no, please continue municipalization with that. Where are we at? The city has produced a comprehensive separation plan that's been submitted to the Public Utilities Commission. The city proposed a schedule which the PUC has accepted, which says a decision on the separation plan in June. There will be more to this process to come. There are other parts and other things that have to happen before we get to flip the switch. Who knows what the PUC is going to decide? That remains to be seen. The fundamental deal here is that we are going to get high levels of renewables quickly if we're actually successful at surviving the legal process, okay? It's going to be low cost because when we did the original modeling on this, we were using wind and solar costs from 2011, and the costs have just crashed since then, okay? 2 cents and 4 cents, unbelievably low cost for that. We're going to bury the wires as quickly as we want to. It'll be our choice as to how quickly we bury them. You know, I think that we should be providing corporate open markets, an opt-out from the city default 2 years after we start. We don't want to do it right away because it's just there's an awful lot of change that's going to be happening. So I think that's what we want. The city, I think, is largely friendly to the concept, but hasn't formally come out and said that they support that concept. Did I say that fairly? Heather is nodding her head yet. Heather Bailey is the director of the Muni effort in Boulder. Let's give her a round of applause. Always nice to stand in front of a friendly audience, isn't it? Okay, the reason this works is because 1/3 of our cost is wires and 2/3 of our cost is generation. And innovation that Excel really can't provide. And it's not just Excel, it's the evil government-regulated monopoly. So it's the evil, just so it's clear, is the evil goes with the government-regulated, oh, I don't care where the evil goes, you decide. Okay, let me give you some examples. Smart Grid City. This was 5 years ago, 8 years ago. Excel put this in place. It was supposed to cost $10 million, it cost $40 million. Here's the real reason why. Because when they went to bury some of the cables, they discovered that there were boulders underground in Boulder, seriously, no joke. And so it cost 4 times as much. It's been abandoned, mostly. There's still little parts of it that are being used. They did a prototype. Now, how many people have been involved with prototypes or at least know what they're generally about, okay? So how many people think that you should do a prototype on 20,000 meters to begin with? How about 100 meters? Okay. I think you got the rest of the story here. Excel did it with 20,000 meters. It was unbelievably badly thought out. And now they want to do it on half the meters in the state.
I don't know that percentage.
We don't know the exact number, but Excel is proposing
$500 million prototype.
$500 million prototype because they did such a good job in Boulder on this. Renewables that cost more, 2.9 cents instead of 1.7 cents. When we wanted to know how much rooftop solar, did Excel tell us this? No, it was the city of Boulder that told us this. Excel has the honor and distinction of building one of the very last coal-fired power plants in the United States. It's also scheduled to be one of the very last to close in 2056 or 4, I don't care. 2070, okay, good. That's what I said. They upped the number of years on that. This is another thing that I love. The separation information, you know that separation plan that the city had to put together? Excel said that's highly confidential information. Homeland Security won't let us release it, okay? And so the city had to go through a highly confidential process, which cost a lot more, of course. And all the people that wanted to be involved and look into it, do things, and almost all the information that is considered highly confidential in Colorado is on the web in California in a much nicer form than what the city got. It's nice little maps that you can actually see. In fact, there's quite a bit more information on there. They're looking to put actual curves of usage on average by month for every single little piece of the distribution system and transmission system in California up on the web publicly. But remember, that's highly confidential in Colorado, and Homeland Security required it. I'm not sure if it's the same Homeland Security. Never mind. Let's review. It's cheap. It's not cheap if Excel and monopolies own it. Here's why it's cheap. We know the recipe. We know there's tremendous resource out there, unbelievable resource. That's the solar in Colorado, unbelievable wind out in the eastern plains. Excel is an unnatural monopoly. Maybe something different is a better way to go, where we have competition in generation and run regionally transmission and run locally distribution systems. We have examples where it's all about the money and it's also all about the principle. We know how to keep the lights on. Corporations are going nuts buying renewables, and they want to buy a lot more. We know that only happens where there's open markets and TSOs. Google is saying that they want to empower energy consumers to choose their energy supply. Other corporations are right behind Google. We've tipped. Maybe. We don't know for sure. Bill McKibben said, climate change is a war where winning slowly is exactly the same as losing. I'll point out that in a couple weeks here, we'll be doing a recap of this, not nearly as long a version of this, so that we can spend a lot of time discussing what it is that we can do to create an open market in Colorado. Thank you so much.